I thought I'd just pop on for a couple minutes, and I was going to read from my Vella. It's on Vella, and also ebook and paperback, and the audiobook should be out probably next week. I'm just waiting for the cover. It's all recorded and ready to go. So, yeah. Um, Sorry, I'm getting it set up. I should have done this first, but I'm going to read just a chapter. I guess we'll start at the beginning. This is from Tales of the Fae, is a series. The first book is called The Shadow Sister. And this is sorting the wrong way. I don't want to read episode 86 because then we're starting in the middle. There we go. Okay, so this is The Shadow Sister, and the first episode is called Bloodborne. Shadow Empress Alisaie rides on the cold marble, parted thighs slick with viscera, onyx skin gone ashen with the strain. Her screams were sharp as knives, full of dark magic as they severed the silent night. Her cries encircled Castle Bleak in a web of shadows that blotted out the twin moons and the very stars above until there was only darkness. The elven slave, with chains tattooed around her brow, hovered over the dying Shadow Fae, wringing her hands. Her gaze shifted from Bleakheart, the sorcerer, to the Empress's engorged stomach. The babes will not be born alive. I've done everything I can. The elf spoke in a whisper that would not have been heard if the room had not grown so silent and somber. The sconces on the walls guttered with each belabored moan of the Empress. Bleakheart leaned in close to the slave and hissed, I know you have ways. I will unbind you if you use your magic to save them. The elf's eyes widened, her expression shifting from hope to terror as she realized what the sorcerer asked of her. No elemental magic would pry the children from her womb, and Bleakheart knew it. Only old magic, forbidden for centuries by her people. Before the elf could respond, Empress Alisaie bolted upright. The blood vessels burst in her eyes as her gaze connected with the slave's, the sclera gone red, pupils dilated, swallowing the violet irises. Get them out of me, please, I beg of you. The once proud ruler, known for never bowing, sounded broken, her voice breathy and hoarse from long hours of screaming. My lady, I cannot, the slave started, but the Shadow Empress reached out and wrapped her hands around the elf's slender throat, causing her to choke on her words. Make sure one of the children lives. There must be an heir. Call them Arita and Lorna. The two names fell from the mother's lips, forced out moments before consciousness left her. She fell back, her body spent. Her head hit the stone with a dull thud before the slave could regain her strangled breath. The elf turned wild, terrified eyes to Bleakheart as she massaged the bruises forming on her throat. Her mouth worked, but no words came out. The sorcerer leaned in so close that his spittle flew in the elf's face as he shouted, I do not care what your people forbid. You belong to us now. Your people are on the wrong side of history, soon to be dead and gone, and you'll do as I say. Get them out of her now, or so help me, I'll kill you and every other elf held in these dungeons. The slave pressed her lips into a grim line. It will kill her if I use magic to bring them into the world. You know elven magic cannot do such things. It requires blood magic, old magic, terrifying. The cost will be the mother's life, possibly more. Blood magic can alter destinies for generations. Bleakheart snorted and waved his hand at the Empress lying motionless on the slab. Her skin faded to the gray of stone, mouth agape, wings hanging limp, shedding pale feathers that were once black to the floor. Her chest barely rose and fell as she wheezed. Do not speak to me of destiny, Bleakheart spat. If you could read the stars as you claim, if your people truly knew what was to be, you would not be where you are today. And look, he gestured at the stone tablet that had birthed 3 generations of empresses. She is already gone. The slave studied Alisaie. The Empress's life force ebbed. There was barely enough magic left to sustain her. She nodded. It is so. So do it. Bleakheart grasped the elf's wrist, and with a spell removed the shackles from around them. They fell to the floor with a clatter. Don't try anything, elf. The sorcerer glanced at the shadow guard standing by the door. They moved forward, menacing, to ring the stone table. Bleakheart thrust a dagger at the elf. The slave's hand shook as she raised the athanium above her head, then brought it down violently. She slashed the blade across the Empress's wrist and continued across her own before pressing the wounds together. Her eyelids fluttered, eyes rolling back in her head, revealing only the milky whites. She whispered words in an ancient, sibilant tongue. Her red blood and the Empress's black mingled, spilling down her arms. It pooled in her hands as with a shriek and a final feat of heroic dark magic the twins were brought into the world. A deluge of blood and thick cloud of shadow poured from the spasming body of the Empress as the last of her magic abandoned her. A single sigh, a final breath, separated the girls who sprang from the dying Shadowfae's loins. First, a pale creature, with snakes of black hair forming a crown around her face the color of the moon. Erida, the one who would rule. Then, almost as an afterthought, the traitor was born. Lavender-eyed and silent, dark like her mother, but with no violence in her gaze, only quiet contemplation. The silence left in the wake of their expulsion from the womb into the world was more disarming than any scream. It lasted only a moment before the firstborn shattered it with her cries. Erida's shrieks set the slave's nerves on edge. She ground her teeth as she plucked the child from the bloodied stone and thrust her at the Shadowfae milkmaid, who set her to suckle at her breast in the hopes of silencing the infant. But when the child's sharp teeth clamped on her teeth, the nursemaid screamed pick up where the mother and daughter had left off. The second daughter, Lorna, remained motionless as the dead thing that had once been the Empress. But unlike her mother, the child was alive, only possessed of a profound, uncanny stillness, near as unnerving as the tempest that was her sister. No servant came to her, for she was of no importance. She was a second-born child, a cursed thing that had stolen her mother's life. The birth of one child was rare enough. Unlike the elves, Fae wombs were not fast to quicken, and deliveries were always difficult. But two babes? Even a creature as powerful as the Shadow Empress could not survive the labor of twin babies. If Lorna had not been, the Empress might still be, and she would be reminded of it for all her days. Bleakheart gazed down at the ruined body of the woman who had ruled the Shadowfae for millennia. Her hair turned bone-white, her skin paper-thin, and no breath stirred within her chest. Empress Alisaie Blackburn was no more. How strange, he thought, that such a small creature could bring the end of an era in her wake. A woman who invaded a foreign world, laid elven cities to waste, claimed them as her own, and enslaved countless minions could be unmade by two mewling babies who knew not what they did. "Sir," said a familiar voice. The father stood in the doorway. Once king consort, but now that his lover was dead meat and bone, no magic left in him, he would be nothing. He would hold no position at court with Alisaie dead. The babes would be raised by advisors. It was the way of the Shadowfae. She is gone. Bleakheart ignored the man's choked sobs and studied the children who had wrought this catastrophe. Tears flowed freely down the milkmaid's face, just as blood ran down her breast, and the firstborn tore into her flesh. The other still lay on the marble birthing bed turned funeral pile, silent, waiting, patiently waiting her turn. As if she knows her place already, Bleakheart thought. This one, he pointed towards the babe at the breast, is Erida. A new Empress is born. That one, he shifted his gaze back to the other, Lorna, the Shadow's sister. May I hold them? The consort asked, his eyes haunted, for surely he knew he would never see the children again after this. Fine, Bleakheart grumbled, silent Lorna lying on the slab. Then find some slut to nurse the whelp when you're done coddling her. He turned to the armored guards, motionless as statues securing the chamber doors. And kill the elf. She failed in her duties. My lord, I tried. I saved the babes. The slave collapsed to her knees, pressing her face to Bleakheart's feet to kiss them in desperate reverence. He gave her a swift kick for her efforts and barked, You failed. The vizier turned away, suddenly sickened by the scene before him. Make the necessary arrangements for a coronation, he ordered the scribes, who sat with pen in hand, documenting the tragedy that occurred on this day. "100 years later. Sibling rivalry. The river Nyx ran red as elven blood down from the mountains of dusk, where it diverted into the crimson moat that swirled around Castle Bleak. A small stream flowed from the trench into the castle proper, coming to a terminus at a large pool in the central courtyard. One of Lorna Blackburn's first memories was of being held face down in that pool, with her sister's claw-like hands digging into her shoulders as she plunged Lorna beneath the surface again and again. She could still taste the mingled copper and sulphur flavor of the water. Now she watched children splash, the water shimmering like oil slicks on their black and gray skin, wondering why she and Erida had never played so innocently together. Why was there always malice between them? Why not the laughter and love that ought to be shared between two motherless girls? She knew the answer, because she had killed their mother, and Erida would never forgive her for that. She was cursed, a second daughter unwanted who had stolen the Empress from the Shadow Court. With a sigh, she set these thoughts aside. There was nothing she could do about them. Erida was what she was, everything Lorna was not, and that was unlikely to change. Surely in the ethereal realms no twin sisters had ever been born less alike. Lorna glanced down at the leather-bound book that lay open in her lap, her eyes skimming the perfectly even lines of elegant script. She squinted, trying to decipher the elven verse. Her translations had come a long way over the years, but much of the text's meaning was still lost on her. She ran her fingers over the dry, fragile page, wishing she could absorb the words, and their magic, with a touch, as it was said the elves could do. What I wouldn't give to have those soft fingers caressing my... Lorna stiffened, and her leathery bat wings flared behind her as she jerked her head up. She curled her fingers, tendrils of black smoke rising from the tips, ready to attack. Then, seeing who it was, she scoffed and relaxed her fist. Osiris Bane's smirking countenance loomed over her. His eyes glittered, deep violet and full of mischief. He stood with arms folded across his chest, gazing down with an air of superiority he had no right to possess. His black feathered wings shadowed her, the unruly mass of his ebony curls tumbling across his forehead. A little buzz of something, irritation, excitement, perhaps both, filled Lorna. She tamped down the ladder and got to her feet. Even then Osiris stood more than a full head taller than her, just like her sister. Only a fool sneaks up on a Blackburn, Osiris, Lorna admonished as the last tendrils of smoke drifted away. Osiris's earnest expression didn't waver when he said, "If I am a fool, it's only because your beauty renders me one, my lady." His lip curled up on the side, revealing a sharp white canine. Lorna was torn between slapping the smug look off his face and pulling him into a passionate kiss. Neither response was appropriate, so instead she sighed and asked, "Why are you here, Osiris? Can I not get a moment's peace?" He dramatically brought his hand to his heart as if wounded by Lorna's words. "Is it so far-fetched that I might simply want to bask in the beauty of the Shadow's sister?" "Yes," Lorna deadpanned. She loathed the moniker the Shadow's sister, and he knew it. The feigned hurt look passed, giving way to Osiris's characteristic smirk. "You know me well, my beautiful dark heart. I come at your sister's bidding. She requests your presence in the war room." Lorna grunted. She should have known. Erida thought of little else of late besides the war she was plotting. Lorna had no interest in her sister's plans to dominate the ethereal realms and subjugate the elves and anyone else who stood in her way. She preferred solitude outside with a book to the oppressive constraints of the over-embellished war room full of pompous know-it-alls who... "Shall I escort you?" Osiris interrupted her thoughts, lifting his arm so she could slip her hand into the crook of it. Lorna sniffed and kept her hands exactly where they were, at her sides. "No need," she asserted, already striding away. "Must you be so cold, Lorna Blackburn? There must be something I can do to win your heart," Osiris called after her. "You're an errand boy, without a drop of noble blood in you, Osiris Bane, and you're an arrogant rogue to boot." She would have gone on, had Osiris not interrupted her again. "You know your sister doesn't want a noble match for you. Too much of a threat to the succession. Besides, we complement one another perfectly. You're the brains and I'm the brawn. You're the lace and I'm the..." Lorna didn't slow her pace as she climbed the stone steps that led inside the castle, interrupting him to shout, "More like oil and water, Osiris. The two never mix." "You'll change your mind one day. You'll see," he called from across the growing space between them. Lorna paused on the landing, then turned to face him. "You like to call me the Shadow's sister, but you do well to remember it. With a word to Erida, I can have you sent to her dungeons as fodder for her next experiment with elven magic." A broad grin spread across Osiris's face. But you never would. And the frustrating thing was that he was right. Episode 3, The War Room. Lorna stepped into the war room and immediately regretted it. She tried to ignore the claustrophobia she felt when confined within the tapestry-draped walls. Images of Shadowfame mounted on nightmare steeds converged on screaming mutilated elves. She never understood why only the massacres and destruction were immortalized for eternity. "It took you long enough," Erida snarled. Lorna's eyes were drawn away from the wall hangings, toward her sister. Erida sat with her back straight and stiff as a board at the head of the long stone table. Her gray hair was a tangled nest around her wan face. Coils of snakes slithered out occasionally to lap at the air with red forked tongues. thin lips pursed in dismay. Though the Shadow Empress was not beautiful, she radiated an aura of power that was difficult not to be cowed by. Lorna dipped into a low curtsy, bowing her head and hiding her chagrined expression behind a curtain of long violet hair. "My apologies, Your Majesty. I wasn't aware we had a meeting this afternoon. I was out getting some air." Erida snorted and rolled her eyes. "You and your air. Perhaps you're better suited for the court of sky than shadows. Shall I ship you off, and let the Sky Fae have their way with you, sister? I could trade you for Uncle Emrit. He's been in their dungeon for an age." An idle threat, Lorna knew. Erida would never put a shadow sorceress of her aptitude in the hands of a court that openly opposed her designs, not even as a prisoner. Of course, the court of sky wasn't known for its heavy-handed tactics. They probably fed their captives bread and honey. But it was a risk, and Erida was as averse to risk unless it was essential. "Yes, well, sit down already. We have important things to discuss." Lorna took one of the empty seats at the table, with the small group of the usual suspects. Her two head generals, Drake and Tyrion, who could never agree about anything, sat across from one another. At least they wouldn't be shouting from across the room, although the risk of one or the other being injured in a brawl increased with this circumstance. Lorna wouldn't be surprised to see them bicker over which end of the sword to hold. Besides Master Blake sat Bleakheart. The pale and trembling wisp of a man was a half-breed, his shadow blood tainted with that of the Fire Fae. Most disliked and mistrusted him, but Erida had taken a liking to him, specifically to his technique for torturing secrets from captive elves, and she could not be warned away from him by her other advisors. Apparently he was a sorcerer of great renown. It was even said his magic had brought them both into the world. However, there were whispers that something else entirely had spared the twins and killed their mother. Either way, Erida had entrusted her experimentation to his frail, shaking hands. Bleakheart looked up, and Lorna quickly averted her eyes, though not in time to avoid catching his creepy, milky white gaze. She didn't like the man, not because of his heritage, but because she could sense his cruelty. It seemed to ebb out of him, along with the heat that leaked from his body, and she had heard the anguished screams of the elves kept in the dungeons. Erida cleared her throat, and everyone in the room snapped to attention. "I suppose you're wondering why I've summoned you four and not the others," the Shadow Empress began, which was true, particularly for Lorna. Erida was displeased with the rate of Lorna's project on the elven manuscript she'd been tasked with interpreting into the Shadow tongue. This strained their already tenuous relationship, and Lorna had found herself invited to fewer and fewer meetings of late. Not that she minded. These were just a formality for Lorna that she would just as soon avoid entirely. "I'm sure Her Majesty has—" Bleakheart's soft voice was silenced by a glare from the Empress. "I don't need your flattery, half-breed," Erida snapped, bringing her fingers to her temples and massaging, as if dealing with her advisors represented the pinnacle of tedium. "You four have special roles to play in what I hope will become our greatest conquest." Lorna bit back a scoff and examined her fingernails. They had been at war with the elves for some time now, and she had seen no signs of imminent victory. The native species of the ethereal realms had more powerful magic, greater knowledge, and they formed a united front. The Fae were divided, their loyalty bound to their birth courts, their armies spread across the realm many miles apart. Some, like the Dreamers and the Sky Fae, did not seek conquest at all, but instead a peaceful coexistence with the elves. "Lorna," Erida's eyes, steel gray and hard as flint, cut to her sister, "I'm reassigning you." "But—" Lorna bit back her protest as a plume of shadows began to swirl around Erida. The Shadow Empress disliked being interrupted. "Those translations are taking too long. It's been years, and all we have are a few disjointed phrases. Useless. We are going to try it my way now." Erida's gaze shifted from Lorna to Bleakheart. "She's to work under you, who I'm equally disappointed in. Where is my undead army? Where are the soldiers you promised me?" The Empress let out a long, drawn-out sigh. "Perhaps the two of you useless fools working together will accomplish something, If Bleakheart can't torture the secrets out of the elves, maybe my sweet little sister can cajole them with that silver tongue of hers." Lorna fought to maintain a neutral expression. Her tongue was no more silver than Erida's heart was gold. She preferred not to speak at all, truth be told, let alone try to coerce slaves and captives to part with their secrets. She was also less than thrilled with the prospect of working alongside the old mongrel sorcerer. She loved her work with the ancient texts, and was making headway, though not fast enough for her impatient sister, apparently. But once Erida had made up her mind, there was no changing it. Bleakheart looked no more pleased by this turn of events than Lorna. His thin lips were drawn down in a quivering frown, and he worried the amulet he wore around his neck with knobby fingers, eyebrows furrowed. Well, what are you waiting for? Erida's eyes shifted back from Bleakheart to Lorna, then back again. Get to work. You're dismissed. She clapped her hands, the sound of her many rings knocking together, cutting through the silence in the room. Being dismissed from the meeting while the other general still remained was a slap in the face. It seemed both Lorna and Bleakheart had found themselves in the wrong end of the Empress's favor. The disgraced pair rose, bowed, and left the throne room, Lorna leading the way. She walked quickly, attempting to slip away without further discussion, but despite his advanced age and fragile physique, Bleakheart managed to match her pace. I don't see you often in the dungeons, girl, the Fire Fae commented. Lorna paused in her steps and turned to face the warlock. That is because I dislike the dungeons, just as I dislike you. She spoke softly, as she always did, but she gave him a hard stare, hoping he would scamper back into his lair and leave her be. Unfortunately, Bleakheart seemed unfazed by her disdain and went on. Do you know, when the first Fae set foot in the ethereal realms, there was no castle, no courtyards, there was only the palace beneath the earth? Lorna sighed and cut him off. Yes, and then my great-grandmother set about capturing the elves and stealing their magic, and over time we pushed them back to the heart of the forest, where the Dream Fae assimilated with them, but they have been thorn in our side ever since. I don't need a history lesson, Bleakheart. Bleakheart coughed a wet, mucusy sound and reached out to grab Lorna's hand. His fingers were uncomfortably warm on her skin, the product of mingled Fire Fae blood in his veins. You'll be spending a good bit of time in the dungeons with me now, girl. Best get used to the shadows you've been shunning your whole life. I'll see you tomorrow at Raven's Hour. Lorna tugged her hand away from him and wheeled on her heel, heading for her chambers in the upper tower. Only when she was out of Bleakheart's sight did she rub the burn marks on her flesh, cursing her sister under her breath.